Hi friends. What if your foods are quietly increasing your risk of cancer? Would you still eat them? You might be shocked to learn how many foods appear healthy but are actually linked to cancers. Now here are the 10 of the world's most overlooked but surprisingly dangerous foods. What did you have for lunch today? Maybe a ham or pastrami sandwich? I bet your ham or pastrami has preservatives like nitrates and nitrites, which is number one. I know you don't want to hear this, but it's like gravity. You can ignore gravity, but it doesn't make it go away. All airplanes that go up will eventually come down somehow because of gravity. And it's really not just pastrami or ham. It's all preserved meats, including your canned Spam. So what's wrong with nitrates and nitrites? Well, these are chemicals that are super reactive with protein to make a new molecule called nitrosamines. That is a carcinogen. So how do you make more nitrosamines? Well, you add some acid, like vinegar. So when you eat your sandwich, you're adding it to your stomach acid, which is more powerful than vinegar. Heat also makes more nitrosamine. So if you heat up your Spam or cook your bacon, you're making more carcinogens. So there goes big food adding preservatives, correct? It's actually worse than that. These preservatives have been used since ancient times. So long before refrigeration, humans used naturally occurring salts like saltpeter, potassium nitrate to preserve meat. And they worked especially well to prevent food poisoning, which was rampant. That is literally the number one reason why people did not survive, besides accidents. At the time, they didn't realize germs was actually poisoning them. They thought it was bad air. They knew something was wrong with their food, but they couldn't quite figure it out. And they still ate it, right? The brain really wants you to do what it wants you to do, even if it makes you physically ill. And in ancient times, no one had a refrigerator, nor did people wash their hands. So after using the bathroom, the germs would easily contaminate their food. Now today, we still take hand washing for granted, and we take plumbing for granted. Now imagine how your world would change if you had to walk over pee and poop on your way to work. You actually literally walk over that, but there's a street that is separating you between the sewer, right? But in ancient times, like the city of Pompeii, their poop and pee was literally flowing in the middle of the street, and people just hopped over cobblestones to avoid them. Imagine what that would smell like. If you have ever gone fishing, you know that fish are not easy to catch. And my dad used to take us fishing on the weekends, and we would get up like 2 or 3 in the morning to drive to Marina del Rey, and we would sit there for hours waiting for the fish. And then my mom would bring all that fish home and clean that fish in our kitchen in the afternoon. Imagine how stinky your house would be if you or your parents did that. Now with their catch for the day, at least we can put it in the refrigerator so that it wouldn't rot. But back in the ancient days, they had to figure out how to preserve their meat so that it wouldn't stricken them with food poisoning. And that's why saltpeters were used. Saltpeters are nitrates. They're used to preserve food, and they preserved it so well that it preserved the food color too. Because no one likes to eat brown meat. And it gets brown because the iron in the meat reacts with oxygen. And the iron is in a molecule called myoglobin. And the oxygen is basically in the air. So today we have refrigerators for meat, but it still turns brown. And I'm sure if you see brown meat, you're not going to want to eat it either unless it was cooked. And that's why people still use nitrates and nitrites as a preservative and to preserve food coloring. So it's a food coloring agent in your meat. So number 2 is actually an omega-3 rich high protein food that so many people think is healthy. It's dried fish, which by the way can sometimes be a great source of calcium too. That's what my mom used to tell me. Eat your fish, you'll get smart, you'll build your bones. So we used to eat a lot of fish as a kid, and my mom cooked with dried, salted, fermented fish, which is actually a staple in many parts of Asia, as well as Africa and the Middle East. And you can find them in your food and restaurants in the States. Well, unfortunately, dried fish, they're strongly associated with cancers of the gastrointestinal tract, especially stomach cancers and esophageal cancers. And they are also linked to nasopharyngeal cancers. Now, why would it cause cancer in your nasal passage? Don't you think that's kind of weird? Well, how do you smell fish? With your nose, right? So what happens when you cook that? Toxic fumes. So what's really wrong with dried fish? I mean, are they eating poisonous fish species? No, By themselves, these fish are actually quite common and considered healthy, like mackerel, anchovy, croaker, tilapia, catfish, sardines, and smoked herring. Now, I try not to eat fish anymore, but I used to eat a lot of fish, and I admit they were tasty. But it's really not the fish that's a problem, but again, it's the preservatives, the nitrates and the nitrite salts that are added to fish. Now, if you're a seafood guru, you know that seafood rots super easily. And if you've ever read the ingredients behind any kind of preserved meats, or sometimes it's actually written in front, I'm sure you've seen the word nitrates or nitrites. Pick up any package of hot dogs or sausages or lunch meat, spam or bacon. You will see those words. Well, fish is a type of meat, so it still needs to be preserved. But dry fish increases cancer. And today we're pushing screening, a screening colonoscopy specifically, to try to catch early cancers. Unfortunately, it's getting earlier and earlier. And I know that there are test kits to test your poop. They're better than nothing, but the point of a colonoscopy is to catch early lesions before they turn cancerous. So your gastroenterologist basically can put a camera up your colon to take a look at the tissue and remove anything suspicious, a polyp, abnormal growth, that your stool kit may miss. And if they snip it, then that's the end of it. It won't turn cancerous because it's out of your body. Now, unfortunately, cancer rates are climbing, especially in people under 50. And it takes over a decade to grow cancers usually. And I've had several friends who actually got the diagnosis of colon cancer before 50 or at 50. And they were having bad symptoms. And unfortunately, they ignored the early symptoms, the subtle symptoms. Some of them were not so subtle. One friend lost 30 pounds and he wouldn't go to the doctor until he was puking all day and couldn't get out of the couch. Ironically, he is a plastic surgeon, but doctors and surgeons, we make the worst patients, right? We never want to admit there's anything wrong with our health. And by the time he got help, he was diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer. The great news is he is in remission after surgery and chemotherapy. And his wife told me that getting cancer was the best thing that could happen to him. Before his cancer diagnosis, he was morbidly obese, eating just about all the different kinds of junk food. He was abusing his body with a lack of sleep, and he wouldn't exercise. When they would go hiking, her husband couldn't keep up with her, and he was iffy on going to church. However, after the cancer diagnosis and after his treatment, he began to look at life differently. He looked at food differently. He started eating more whole food. He took up jogging every day, as well as resistant training. He lost 100 pounds, where now he's no longer morbidly obese, but he's actually fit. And before his cancer diagnosis, he had several risk factors that he ignored. Number one was that he was morbidly obese, which is an independent risk factor for many cancers. And number two, he was overdue for his colonoscopy. He was supposed to have gotten that checked at 45 years old, but he ignored it. And if he had gotten his colonoscopy then, maybe they would have found a little tiny polyp that they could have resected. That by itself would have saved him countless hours of going to the doctor, probably spared his bowel because he lost some bowel with the surgery, and then he wouldn't have gotten chemotherapy. And number three, he got rid of his processed foods. Industrialized, mass-produced hams and sausages like prosciutto, salami, deli meats. These meats commonly have nitrites and nitrates, as well as other additives. And in 2015, World Health Organization declared these processed meats to be carcinogenic, even though they've been around since ancient times. They said it loud and clear that processed meats are a group 1 carcinogen. I don't think there's a rank higher than that. This is the same level as with tobacco smoke and asbestos. And technically, we don't have a randomized controlled trial to prove that these processed meats are that bad, but we also don't have that with tobacco or asbestos. I mean, who's going to volunteer for these trials? And for anybody who believes that processed meats are healthy, well, it's kind of like smoking. Obviously, some people don't mind getting exposed. But I'm pretty practical. I live in the real world. And pretty much it shows me that if you smoke, bad things will happen. If you eat a lot of processed meats, bad things probably happen too. I am seeing people who are younger with gastrointestinal cancers that are aggressive, super aggressive. These patients I never saw 20 years ago. And there's really something wrong with our food because we are seeing more people younger in their 30s and 40s have aggressive metastatic gastrointestinal gastrointestinal cancers. Eating just 50 grams, about 2 slices of processed meats a day, increases colorectal cancer risk by 18%. Now, I'm the first to admit that I ate a ton of processed meat with my school lunches as a kid. I ate that every single day. I used to love bologna, and I would have 2 slices on my sandwiches with some lettuce and tomatoes and with absolutely unhealthy white bread. And I did this for years as an elementary school and junior high. So I was concerned for my own gastrointestinal tract. So I got a colonoscopy a few years ago and I had a pristine colon. So obviously not everybody who eats those meats will guarantee that they're going to get cancer. Just like not everybody who smokes will guarantee that they have a shortened lifespan. But it's like playing Russian roulette. You never know who's it. And your grandfather probably smoked and ate all that stuff and he's still around in his 90s. Well, he probably won the genetic lottery. There's less and less people who can win the lottery these days. And I don't buy a lottery ticket because I don't think I'm ever going to win. But somebody's always winning a multi-million-dollar jackpot. So are you going to buy a lottery ticket just because one person wins a jackpot once in a while? I'm not willing to push my luck. And that's why I don't eat processed meats anymore. You still may not believe that these foods are bad because they are super ancient foods. Ham has been made in Italy and Spain for generations, and so has dried fish around coastal nations. But remember, ancient people passed away from food poisoning and other infectious diseases early in life. They usually didn't live past their 30s. Today, even nations with the most processed foods live twice as long. And if you don't care about your longevity or health span, then really it doesn't matter what you eat. However, many people are concerned. And if that's you, then you should really think about reducing or eliminating processed meats. I mean, you know it's bad when big food no longer adds the word nitrate or nitrite salt to these processed meats. However, their meats still have nitrates. And do you know how they do it? They add the term celery juice or beet juice. Naturally occurring nitrates or nitrites in celery juice or beet juice. Well, whether it's natural or they actually put the nitrate or nitrites, it's still going to have the chemicals. But beets are high in polyphenols and antioxidants and vitamin C. So if you just drink fresh celery juice or beet juice, then they are not linked to cancer. And in fact, it is good to help you reduce inflammation. And these foods actually can help you lower your risk of cancer. But that's not how they're using it. They're using it because they're naturally curing these meats. They're not really nitrate-free when they say they're nitrate-free because they can still form nitrosamines, the carcinogens, with beet juice or celery juice, especially when you add heat to it. Now, have you heard of the supplement creatine? Do you know how they make creatine? Well, it's found in muscle tissue. So muscles have amino acids and creatine. So when you heat up muscle, like your steak, whether it's grilling it, baking it, or frying it, you're actually making more heterocyclic amines. And those can also damage your DNA. Damaged DNA basically leads to cancer. So cooking temperatures above 300 degrees Fahrenheit can cause the formation of heterocyclic amines. That includes stir frying, grilling, barbecuing, or air frying. I got an air fryer recently, and I try to make sure that the temperature stays below 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Heterocyclic amines have been shown to increase the risk of several cancers, including colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, and prostate and breast cancer. And this is why red meat is number 3, considered to be a group 2A carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Now, my mom and many people would disagree with them because she believed people need some red meat because it was a good source of iron. And she would get fixated on it and want to make sure that we had some red meat daily with our meals. But it was always a mixed dish, which is the most common way meat is consumed in the US, like lasagna or shepherd's pie. I would have guessed hamburger. I thought most people ate hamburgers to get their red meat, but that's actually the second way. Now, I'm the first to admit that red meat is quite tasty, but I don't eat that anymore either, despite the fact that my sister-in-law grills the best food ever. I used to go to her house and she would grill different kinds of chicken and meat whenever she hosted a party. Super tasty barbecue, grilled steak, kebabs. Unfortunately, these are all good sources of nitrosamines and heterocyclic amines, as well as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are all carcinogenic. How does this make sense? Because people have been using fire to cook with eons. Well, if you think about it, that's how we do chemistry experiments, right? Remember the Bunsen burner in your high school chem lab? You add heat to a raw egg and you make it solid, an irreversible chemical reaction. Now, you can boil that egg and it looks white. You can fry that egg and it's kind of yellow on the brownish side, depending depending on how long you cook it. And if you burn that egg, well, it turns black. So you can obviously tell that it's changed in color. I think most people would understand that, blackened food is not healthy to eat, right? But nobody ever thinks about how these chemicals change and how they affect your body when they change under heat. But now you know that when you eat your foods, depending on how you cook them, you are making chemical reactions. You're literally a food scientist. You may not be recording what you're doing, but you are testing it out every day. Now, if you want to lessen these carcinogenic compounds, then change how you cook it and use what forms of cooking, like boiling, steaming, stewing. Because I know some of you want to be a flexitarian, where you eat both meat and plant. Longevity nations like Northern Italy, they eat meat as a part of their diet, but they also eat seafood and diversity of whole plants that the majority of Americans choose to ignore. And unfortunately, our stats show that we not only don't live very long, but we are sick for the last 12 years of our life. And it's unfortunate that these foods are turning out to be as toxic as cigarettes. Now, even smokers who don't quit probably don't need to if they don't care about longevity. And I've been a physician for almost 30 years, and I can tell you it's really hard to be healthy and physically independent without drugs when you're in your 70s. And it gets even harder to make it in your 80s, upright and independent. And the question we should all be asking ourselves is, are we willing to reach those ages and be dependent on other people or sick in bed? What do we really value? Some people value the freedom of choice to eat whatever they want, right? Soda, candy, and other people want the freedom from being tethered to the medical system. And that's what happens when you get sick. Now, if you value the latter, it's not a random flexitarian lifestyle, right? It's purposeful to know what to eat and what to avoid. Like number 4, sugar-sweetened beverages. And it's not just soda, folks. It's your blended coffee drinks, your tea drinks, fruit-flavored pretend juices, energy drinks, sports drinks. I'm sure I've left some things out. Even lemonade. Basically any drink with added refined or concentrated sugars, which include table sugar, powdered sugar, coconut sugar, palm sugar, honey, agave maple syrup, high fructose corn syrup, concentrated fruit juices. There are just too many for me to name. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that's not healthy. You already know it. And every day may be an exception to you, or that may be the only thing that you do bad. My mom used to feed us soda when I was sick as a kid. She just wanted me to stay hydrated. Little did she know that soda isn't a good source of hydration and contributes to so many problems, especially dental caries. But I think the worst problem of all is that one becomes addicted to that sugar, and you start seeking and thinking about sugar in everything that you eat. It's not just your drink. It starts from your drink. Then you're adding sugar to your meat dishes and to your breads. I'm sure if you've addicted to sugar, you know what I mean. Ketchup is essentially sugar. And then not to mention that caffeine in cola when you drink it every day. Anything that makes you crave and think about it, it's really an addiction. And now we know highly refined sugar diets increase your risk of obesity, and obesity increases your risk of cancer. Now, you probably don't recognize who's obese these days because everybody looks the same. I have many friends who think they are just a little bit overweight, when in reality, they are obese. And if you mention it to them, they become quite defensive because they think obesity is referring to how they look. In order to solve the obesity crisis, we need to first recognize and admit that we have a problem with a stigma of obesity, and we need to remove that negative stigma that comes with the term obesity.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
Obesity is a medical term. It has nothing to do with how you look, but obviously this medical term is a physical attribute. And obesity has nothing to do with how strong you are. Sumo wrestlers are very strong athletes, but no one would argue that they are obese. And they don't refute being obese either. Obesity is defined as a body mass index number. And here's where race comes into play. There are different BMI or body mass index cutoffs for people who are obese in the Asian ancestry versus non-Asian populations. So if you're Asian like me, you are obese at a lower weight than our non-Asian friends. And this is because because Asians, we tend to collect our weight inside our gut. It's a visceral fat, the beer belly shape, the fat that is bathing your organs. That is the most dangerous fat. So if someone has ever mistaken you for being pregnant, instead of being insulted, you should actually thank them for alerting you to the possibility that you have something abnormal. Potentially, that's a collection of visceral fat, which makes the person, if they're Asian, a high risk for diabetes, heart disease, and metabolic syndrome. That same BMI would be considered normal in Western populations. Studies show, for example, that Asians can have a similar risk for type 2 diabetes at a BMI of 23 as a non-Asian with a BMI of 27 or higher. So if you have love handles on the outside, that's actually okay. But it's a fat that is hiding inside your gut around your organs. That's the dangerous fat. There's actually a condition called lipodystrophy. It's a pretty rare condition in which abnormal fat distributes in the body. So you can be pretty lean on the outside. In fact, so lean that you have no fat. That's called lipoatrophy. And then you have too much fat in the wrong places, lipohypertrophy. And oftentimes this is linked to metabolic problems like insulin resistance, diabetes, and high triglycerides. And unfortunately, children can inherit this condition in which they have a loss of fat from their arms and legs, but the fat builds up in their face, in their neck, and their abdomen, inside their abdomen. And they may look extremely muscular in appearance, but inside they get sickened by early onset diabetes, fatty liver, and high triglycerides. So if you're on social media and on the internet, you've probably seen people getting chiseled on an all sugar diet and losing a ton of fat. People are eating like 1,000 grams of sugar and losing weight. So how does this work? Well, this is not new, folks. If you remember my videos, I've been talking about how your body metabolizes sugar and fat very differently, and one affects the other. So if you want to efficiently metabolize sugar, then you have to keep your fat low. And when you keep your fat low, you actually start burning your own fat. And when you increase your fat intake from your diet, you actually increase the amount of insulin in response to the same amount of carbohydrates or sugar and starches that you eat. And when you decrease your fat intake, you can actually lower the amount of insulin that it requires for you to metabolize the same sugar and carbohydrates or the starches. And why is that? Because fat inhibits your mitochondria from metabolizing the sugar. Remember how at one point your kid could probably eat a ton of sugar and get that sugar high, be bursting with energy, and you told them to stop bouncing off the wall, right? You probably did that as a kid. Those were the good old days when you had healthy mitochondria. As you age and as your children age, when they start eating more fat, they start gaining weight. And the weight, it didn't just go to places like your love handles and cheeks. Some of that fat gets infiltrated in organs that help you regulate your sugar. So you essentially become like Kobe beef, and that literally makes your muscles insulin resistant. If you don't know what Kobe beef is when they force feed almost grains to cattle so that they pack on saturated fat in their muscles. Tasty to eat, it's not so healthy to be in. And your muscles are your best friend when it comes to your fight against blood sugar, obesity, and diabetes. And your muscles, they will get damaged when it has too much fat. And every time you eat sugar, you will see higher sugar spikes, which results in higher insulin levels to try to take care of that sugar spike. And unfortunately, your supplements, most prescription medications, and eating fat or protein along with your sugar, it doesn't really improve the situation unless you can increase the quality of your food and reduce the amount of calories that you're eating. But if you take a medication that reduces the overall calories that you eat, this literally will help you get rid of the fat in your muscles and make you more insulin sensitive. But if you're dependent upon that medication to do it, then you need to be on it for life. And when we become more insulin sensitive, then that means your body needs less insulin to take care of the same amount of carbohydrates or sugar. So insulin is a growth hormone and signals your body to grow and literally pack on fat. And when you stop eating fat, you start burning up your own fat, and then your metabolism can be more efficient when you eat the sugar and starches so that it doesn't get stored as fat. This whole cascade makes you lose weight, especially that fat weight, so you become more metabolically fit. But you're not going to gain muscle unless you exercise. The metabolic effect has been shown and proven to be true for the last century. And in fact, people tested healthy volunteers on a high sugar diet, a high fat diet, a high protein diet, and even a fasting diet. And when they challenged them with the same amount of carbohydrates, a carbohydrate load challenge, the group who had the worst sugar spikes were the people who fasted because they're releasing releasing their own lipids, their own fat, and people who ate fat. When you're fasting, you're in starvation mode, right? So that your body still needs energy. And if you're not eating sugar, then your body will mobilize fat to give you that energy. And this totally makes physiological sense to protect you. So when you're eating a lot of saturated fat, whether you're on a ketogenic diet, carnivore diet, or a standard American diet or low carb diet, don't be surprised that when you eat simple sugars on repeat and excess every day, that you will become more insulin resistant and you will make it more difficult for yourself to tolerate these sugars. And when you eat them, you will actually pack on more fat. And that's why you're tolerating less food than you did when you were younger, right? You can't eat the volume if you're eating the same type of foods. Sugar is really the energy molecule for life. And despite what keto people think, sugar is a chosen molecule. Ideally, your body wants sugar for energy. In the presence of sugar, it turns off fat metabolism, but it doesn't want to waste resources. So if you're eating fat, especially saturated fat, that signals to your body you have plenty. And unfortunately, when you're overweight or obese, you get in this vicious cycle of persistent insulin resistance, because even when you don't eat, your body is releasing saturated fat from your own personal stores. And this biochemistry has allowed physicians over the past century to treat people who are morbidly obese or have had bad diabetes, and they were able to get their diabetes under control and get their weight down and their insulin requirements down. Now, in the old days, physicians recommended a low-fat diabetic diet, but they allowed refined sugars and breads and other starches if people ate low-fat. And their patients dramatically improved blood sugar, insulin, fatty liver, and obesity. Later on, Dr. Walter Kepner, he used low-fat, high-starch rice diet, and he was also able to reverse obesity as well as malignant hypertension. And after that, Dr. McDougall, he activated for a starch diet. That, again, helped people to control their blood sugars and improve their diabetes. Now, all of these patients dramatically lost weight once they stopped eating the fat. And fat, it's hiding in your meat, in your processed foods. But if you don't change the quality of the foods, then you'll succumb to what early physicians noticed, that a highly refined sugar diet still increased the risk of cardiovascular disease. So Dr. Kepner's patients, some of them didn't make it. You know what the problem was with these sets of patients? The physicians didn't pay attention to their micronutrients, which are essential to life. And you can't give people a highly refined sugar or starch diet and expect them to be healthy for very long, because you're going to be missing lots of micronutrients. And right now, we only think about the essential micronutrients, but there are thousands of micronutrients that we still don't understand, and they are trapped in plant cell walls. They're trapped in the fiber. When you eat refined sugars and starches like white rice, white flours, and table sugar, you get into metabolic trouble despite the fact that your blood sugars are improving. You may even lose weight, and you may even look better on the outside. And just because you're skinnier, honestly, doesn't mean you're healthier. Because if you're missing just one essential micronutrient, your body won't be able to work very well. But of course, if you have persistent high blood sugars, even though they were lower than they used to be when you were more insulin resistant, they can still damage your arteries. They are still sticking to proteins, making advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, that literally ages your body. It's astonishing to me that despite knowing that empty sugars and starches don't improve the health of patients, the American Diabetes Association, they used to not tell people to stop eating sugar and fat, but instead they opted to advocate for, eating in moderation, checking your blood sugar levels, and monitoring a person's hemoglobin A1C level, treating a dietary problem with medications. And why did they do that? Now, I wasn't there at the time, but it's pretty suspicious that they're receiving donations from the sugar industry. We treat a disease caused by eating highly refined sugar and starches with medications. Does that make sense? So I'm sure you've seen how people are looking pretty muscular with a high sugar, low fat, and low protein diet, contradicting the narrative that sugar is causing you to be fat. And that's a problem with social media. It only tells you half the story, right? You need both sugar and fat to be fat. And that's because fat poisons your sugar metabolism. So therefore, when you eat both fat and sugar, you just get fatter if you overeat it. And by reducing your fat intake, you can actually eat more sugar. But you won't get that chiseled look that people who eat a high sugar diet unless you exercise. When you eat a low fat, high sugar diet, you actually make a hormone called FGF21 in response to the presence of fructose. Now, FGF21 stands for fibroblast growth factor 21. And it's a hormone that's like a protein that improves your mitochondrial function and increases its ability to burn fat. So this is your body's built-in hormone to protect you from the sugar, but ironically, sugar itself ends up breaking it. So it's kind of like your body's actual emergency response brake when you eat too much sugar. FGF21 is supposed to suppress your craving to eat more sugar. And when you secrete it, it tells your body to burn fat, don't crave any more sweets, cool it down. However, when your diet is full of sugar, like all day long and every day, every meal, eventually your body just stops listening to FGF21 and you develop FGF21 resistance. When that resistance happens, you actually store more fat, you burn less fat, and your sugar cravings go out of control. Now, the good news is you don't have to eat a ton of ridiculous amount of unhealthy sugar with fructose to stimulate FGF21. So every time you exercise, every time you get exposed to cold weather or restrict your protein intake, especially animal protein, you actually force your liver to make more FGF21. And the reason why eating a high sugar diet or a high fructose diet is bad is that FGF21, when you overdo it, right, you'll develop FGF21 resistance. And obese people and those with type 2 diabetes, they have high levels of FGF21, but unfortunately, they don't respond to that hormone anymore. Isn't that ironic? Consuming sugar, especially high fructose soft drinks, fruit juice, and other processed foods with a lot of fructose will eventually stop your body from responding to FGF21. But your liver is going to keep trying to produce it because it feels like it's not making enough. And if you're on a high-fat ketogenic and carnivore diet, I'm sure you've seen that you've lost some fat. And one of the strongest inducers of FGF21 is low glucose and low insulin, which occurs in people who avoid carbohydrates. And if you're on a high-starch diet, you actually don't get fructose unless you're eating fruit juice, table sugar, honey, agave, high fructose corn syrup, right? If you're just eating starch, it doesn't have fructose. And starch or glucose, it doesn't stimulate FGF21 at the same level. But on the other hand, fructose doesn't stimulate insulin. And so when you think about all these combinations, people who eat a high sugar diet and avoid starches actually have a higher level of FGF21. And high fructose levels like agave, honey, or table sugar are whole ways that they can do it. And remember, they kept their protein low so that they don't go into catabolism and break down their own protein, but they don't eat excess and that gets converted to fat. Now, most people think of sugar and fat for energy production, and they think of protein as a structural molecule. But in reality, fat, like omega-3 fats, are an integral structural part of your body, and sugar, like glucose, are an integral structural part of your cartilage and DNA. So you really need all three macronutrients to survive well and to thrive. And when you eliminate any group of macronutrients, that's an extreme diet, and you are unlikely to achieve longevity. Now, refined sugars are indirectly linked to obesity-related cancers like breast cancer, endometrial cancer, and colorectal. And they also lead to inflammation and insulin resistance and fat accumulation when you overdo it. So that's why it's important not to have these restrictions. And as a direct result of our nation's sugar addiction, we have rising weight. We have rising blood sugars. There's a ton of low-calorie or no-calorie sweeteners that are destroying our microbiome. They thought at one time it was a genius idea to have sugar without the calories of sugar. So essentially, you're trying to trick your metabolism while satisfying your brain addiction. If you haven't noticed in life, you can't trick your metabolism because your body was designed with multiple backups to keep you alive. And your brain may know that there's an abundance of food and calories, but oftentimes it can't control itself. But your body, it doesn't know that. And hence, there is this disconnect between what we think and what drives us to do things and how we sacrifice our health to do it. Did you know that at different parts of history, we actually had shortages of sugar? And because of this sugar shortage, there was a growth of low-calorie sweeteners like saccharin. You know, that's actually number 5. Aspartame came into play in the 1960s as a low-calorie substitute to help people lose weight. And now we know that these claims are made up. They don't help people lose weight. You don't lose weight from eating sugar substitutes. And in fact, many people on sugar substitutes, they gain weight. I've never met anybody who regularly drinks diet soda and has lost weight from drinking diet soda. Because most of the time, people who are seeking diet soda, they're eating a bunch of other sugary refined starches that's full of fat. So if you haven't changed your diet and you just added diet soda, you're unlikely to lose weight. And these artificial sweeteners that can induce inflammation in your gut by changing your gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome is critical in determining your weight and metabolism. And in addition, the World Health Organization, they've declared aspartame to be a probable human carcinogen. But sugar sweeteners are everywhere. It's not just in your diet soda. They're in your sports drinks, energy drinks, vitamin drinks, low-calorie lemonade, and iced teas. You should try to avoid them. Number 6 are are instant noodles. In college, we used to call them cancer noodles. But my roommates, they would still eat them at midnight and chuckle about how they're eating cancer noodles, but they tasted so good. Luckily, I never liked noodles, especially those that were instant. Once my friend was stirring a fork in his hot noodle soup to try to mix the broth around, and when he took out his fork, half of it was missing because it had melted in the broth. And of course, I told him not to eat it. Didn't think it was a good idea, but he still ate it anyway because he was hungry. Now, instant noodles are ultra-processed food. And ultra-processed foods, they increase people's risk of cancer, especially colorectal cancer. Have you seen the ingredient list? It's made with so many different artificial ingredients, emulsifiers, and acrylamide. And unfortunately, the problem isn't just with instant noodles. It's also in number 7, your favorite snacks and chips. And I know you probably only do it once in a while and you think it's okay that you reduced it so much more than before. But the bottom line is ultra-processed foods such as chips and crackers, they not only are empty calories to pack on that fat and to give you that sugar, but they are usually full of added unhealthy ingredients, artificial additives, emulsifiers, acrylamide, and preservatives. And it's not just cancer, it's actually linked to an all-cause mortality, but it has a strong colon cancer link as well. And many of these tasty, shelf-stable cakes and cookies, they also contain number 8, hydrogenated trans fats like margarine and shortening. Unfortunately, these are in fried food. And trans fats are now banned in America, but you can still find them in restaurants, and they're also hidden in partially hydrogenated oils. Trans fats are linked to inflammation, higher cancer risk, and it contributes to diabetes. And trans fats, they're hidden in number 9, refined carbohydrates with white flour. And no one eats flour on its own. It would taste rock hard and tasteless. But if you soften it, add some fats to it, some margarine. Well, food companies, they actually save a lot of money if they put trans fats because they don't have to pay for butter. But the products that make white bread, pastries, crackers, and baked goods, they also have a high glycemic index, which means that it spikes your sugar and keeps it up for longer, promoting an environment that supports tumor growth, especially in breast and colorectal tissue. So number 10 is alcohol, including beer, wine, and spirits. There's no question alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen, even though it's an ancient food, right? It's directly linked to breast, liver, esophageal cancer, or rectal cancers. It's partially due to the acetaldehyde and oxidative stress that alcohol causes your body. And what a bummer. I've taken away most of what people really love to enjoy, right? But the good news is there are plenty of tastier and healthier foods. If you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.